How did Viking ships avoid becoming floating mass graves, when far cleaner ships, centuries later, killed their crews by the thousands? Picture it. 65 men pressed shoulder to shoulder on a wooden vessel barely wider than a modern car. No toilets, no drainage, no freshwater tanks, no cabins to retreat into, no medical bays, no isolation, no margin for error. Just an open deck, constantly slick with salt spray. Cold wind cutting through wool and skin. Night after night of exposure. Soaked clothing. Unbroken proximity. By every biological rule we understand today, this should have been a catastrophe waiting to happen. Human waste with nowhere to go. Food spoiling in damp air. Parasites moving from body to body. Bacteria multiplying in the cold shadows of wood and rope. One fever, one infection, one unlucky meal. That should have been enough. History tells us that on far cleaner ships, with doctors and sanitation systems, entire crews collapsed from disease in a matter of weeks. Fleets rotted from the inside out without ever seeing battle. And yet, on these ships, something strange happened. The sickness never came. The collapse never followed. The crews did not dissolve into chaos or death. Not once. Not occasionally. But consistently voyage after voyage, generation after generation, for nearly 3 centuries. Men lived. Ships returned. Expeditions expanded farther into colder, harsher oceans. That contradiction between what should have happened and what actually did is not a footnote in history. It's the doorway into a system of survival so counterintuitive, so disciplined, and so deeply human, that it still challenges how we think about technology, hygiene, and resilience today. And that is where this story truly begins. Between the 9th and 11th centuries, Viking crews did something no one should have been able to do with ships like theirs. They crossed the North Atlantic again and again, not drifting, not getting lucky, but navigating with intent. They reached Iceland by 874 AD, Greenland by 985, and North America around the year 1000. These weren't single, heroic accidents frozen in legend. They were sustained operations carried out over generations. Ships returned. Crews survived. Fleets regrouped, reprovisioned, and pushed even farther into colder, more hostile waters. This only deepens the mystery. Because when history advances forward in time, the outcome reverses. By the 18th and 19th centuries, ships were larger, stronger, and far more sophisticated. They had sealed decks to keep water out, dedicated latrines to manage waste, freshwater barrels stacked below deck, surgeons, medical protocols, and written hygiene regulations. And yet, these ships became death traps. Cholera tore through crews in weeks. Typhus spread through confined decks. Dysentery weakened men before storms ever touched them. Ship fever emptied vessels that never left harbor. Disease, not combat, became the greatest enemy at sea. So the question sharpens. How did the most primitive ships on record remain operational, while technologically advanced vessels collapsed from within? The answer does not lie in better medicine, or superior materials, or forgotten scientific knowledge. It lies in a place historians didn't think to search, in what Viking shipbuilders deliberately refused to build. Here's the first assumption most people get wrong. Vikings were not dirty. In fact, to many of their contemporaries, they were unsettlingly clean. Outsiders noticed it immediately, not with admiration, but with discomfort. An Arab diplomat, Ahmad ibn Fadlan, wrote with open disgust about Norsemen washing their faces, hands, and hair every single day. They often shared the same water, but they never skipped the ritual. Cleanliness was not optional. It was expected. In England, the complaints were even more telling. Chroniclers grumbled that Vikings bathed so frequently that Saturdays became known as washing day. The irritation was cultural, even moral. Their habits felt excessive, almost threatening, in a medieval world where bathing was rare and suspicion of the body ran deep. Archaeology confirms what the texts described. Viking graves belonging to farmers, Traders, warriors, and elites alike are filled with grooming tools. Bone and antler combs, tweezers, ear cleaners, razors, carefully shaped and well used. These objects appear again and again, not as ornaments, but as necessities. They weren't symbols of wealth. They were tools of maintenance. Cleanliness wasn't a personal quirk or a sign of vanity. It was cultural discipline, reinforced by habit, expectation, and social pressure, which makes the contradiction even sharper. Why would a society so committed to hygiene willingly board ships with no toilets, no drainage, and no permanent sanitation systems at all? Why would people who bathed weekly and groomed daily choose vessels that, by modern logic, should have made cleanliness impossible? That question leads us closer to the real system at work, one that didn't rely on infrastructure, but on something far more deliberate. In 1904, a group of Norwegian farmers digging through heavy blue clay uncovered something extraordinary. Beneath the soil lay the Oseberg ship, one of the most perfectly preserved Viking vessels ever found. For archaeologists, it was a time capsule. Every detail was recorded with precision. Textiles folded and preserved by centuries of earth. Cooking vessels still arranged where hands last placed them. Carts, carved wooden posts, tools, and personal objects, all catalogued piece by piece. This was not a hurried excavation. Nothing was overlooked. And yet, amid all that survived, something crucial was missing. There was no trace of how dozens of people managed bodily waste during long voyages at sea. No chamber pots tucked into corners. No designated latrine spaces. No drainage channels cut into the hull. Nothing. At first, scholars tried to explain it away. Perhaps Oseberg was ceremonial, a burial ship, never meant to sail with a living crew. Then came Gokstad, excavated in 1880, a true warship. Scarred by use, built for distance, proven by wear patterns to have crossed open ocean. The result was the same. Again, no sanitation infrastructure. Again, no evidence of waste management systems. In 2020, modern technology entered the picture. Ground-penetrating radar scanned the Gjellestad ship before excavation, revealing its structure without disturbing the soil. The conclusion did not change. Across centuries, across ship types, across excavation methods, from hand tools to advanced imaging, the absence remained consistent. At that point, it could no longer be dismissed as chance or lost to time. The silence in the ships was intentional. What Viking shipbuilders left out mattered just as much as what they built, and that omission was the key to understanding how these vessels stayed alive at sea. To understand why Vikings deliberately avoided sanitation systems, we have to examine what happened when later ships embraced them. In 1854, the British warship HMS Thunderer represented the height of naval progress. It was modern by every standard of its age. The ship had purpose-built toilets designed to control waste, dedicated sick bays to isolate the ill, trained surgeons on board, written hygiene regulations meant to prevent outbreaks before they began. And yet, none of it worked. Cholera killed 43 men in just 2 weeks. This was not an isolated tragedy. It was a pattern repeated across navies and centuries. Throughout the age of sail, disease consistently killed more sailors than storms, accidents, or enemy fire. As ships became more enclosed, more organized, and more sanitary, they also became more biologically dangerous. Waste accumulated instead of disappearing. Freshwater stagnated in barrels below deck. Organic matter decayed in dark, sealed spaces. Bacteria flourished where air and motion could no longer disrupt them. Sanitation did not eliminate disease. It concentrated it. These ships turned into sealed ecosystems, where pathogens multiplied quietly, unchecked, and deadly. Viking shipbuilders had no microscopes. They didn't understand bacteria or germ theory, but they understood outcomes. They knew what happened when waste lingered. They saw what followed containment. They recognized that enclosed spaces bred sickness, so they made a choice that would seem reckless by modern standards, yet proved devastatingly effective. They refused to let waste exist on board at all. No systems to manage it. No structures to contain it. No spaces where disease could take root. Instead, they designed ships that forced immediate removal, or nothing. It wasn't ignorance. It was practical wisdom, shaped by survival, and refined at sea. Viking longships sat astonishingly low in the water, far lower than most vessels that came after them. Stand at the rail, and the sea was not distant or abstract. It was right there, close enough to touch, close enough to shape daily life on board. That proximity was not a flaw in design. It was the design. When waste was produced, it did not linger. It went directly overboard, immediately swallowed by moving salt water. Salt water is hostile to many human pathogens. Constant motion prevents concentration. Depth eliminates re-exposure before microbes can regroup. Nothing was stored long enough to rot. Nothing was sealed long enough to ferment. Without accumulation, outbreaks had nowhere to begin. Even when storms made overboard disposal difficult, the solution remained temporary and disciplined. Simple wooden buckets were used only as long as absolutely necessary. They were never sealed, never stored, never allowed to sit and fester. At the first safe moment, they were emptied back into the sea. The ship was never treated as a container. It was not meant to hold human byproducts, fluids, or decay. It functioned as a platform suspended above an immense, moving system capable of dilution on a scale no human technology could match. The ocean didn't merely receive Viking waste. It dispersed it, broke it apart, and erased its biological threat almost instantly. What later ships tried to manage internally, Viking longships handed over to the sea itself. And in doing so, they turned the most dangerous part of life at sea into something that never had time to become deadly. But waste disposal was only one layer of a much larger system. Viking ships drew less than a single meter of water. That shallow draft changed everything. It meant these vessels were not bound to harbors or ports. They could slide onto land almost anywhere: sandy coves, gravel beaches, river mouths hidden from open sea, places no deep-hulled ship could reach. Because of this, Viking crews did not remain offshore for long stretches. They stopped frequently, often every few days, sometimes every night. Archaeologists have identified more than 200 Viking landing sites stretching from Norway to Newfoundland, spaced at intervals of roughly 200 kilometers. This was not coincidence. It was a network. Each landing served the same essential purpose: a reset. Men dispersed inland instead of remaining packed together. Clothes were stripped off and washed in cold streams. Bodies were scrubbed with sand, water, and friction rather than soap. Lice, fleas, and parasites were physically removed. Infection chains were broken before they could stabilize. At Torksey, in England, what initially appeared to be a simple river landing revealed something far more complex. Excavation uncovered a 55-hectare winter base, a temporary city larger than many contemporary towns. It had space, order, and time for maintenance. The ship itself never became a sanitation problem, because it was never expected to carry that burden for long. But this solution came with a cost. Archaeological evidence shows elevated levels of intestinal parasites around Viking trading centers and seasonal camps. The biological load was shifted outward, onto the landscape and the populations that interacted with it. Crew health was preserved by moving the problem away from the ship. It was not a clean solution in the modern sense. It was a functional one. And in a world where survival mattered more than comfort, that distinction made all the difference. Viking cleanliness was never enforced by written law. There were no inspectors, no punishments carved in stone. It was enforced by something far more powerful: shame. Every morning, a comb passed through hair and beard, stripping away lice before they could multiply. Every week, bodies met water, breaking parasite life cycles long before science could name them. Neglect wasn't a private failure. It was visible, and visibility meant judgment. A poorly groomed man didn't just look dirty, he looked weak, undisciplined, unreliable, a risk to the group. In a world where survival depended on trust, reputation mattered more than comfort, more than convenience, more than personal freedom. The ornate combs found in Viking graves were not symbols of vanity. They were tools of survival, engineered with precision, carried everywhere, and crafted beautifully because they mattered. Beauty was not decoration. It was a signal of care, discipline, and readiness. When storms made waste disposal impossible, behavior tightened. When routine slipped, social pressure pulled it back into place. And when discipline finally failed, shore stops reset the entire system. Washing, airing, cleansing, restoring order. No kings were needed. No laws were written. The system worked because everyone watched, and no one wanted to be the weak link. Freshwater spoils quickly at sea, far faster than most people imagine. Centuries later, sailors would fear water barrels as much as enemy cannons. Not because they ran empty, but because they turned lethal. The Vikings avoided this danger almost by accident. They didn't trust still water. They didn't rely on it. Instead, they carried weak beer and sour milk. Beer required boiling, long before fermentation could begin. Boiling killed what the eye could not see. Sour milk fermented naturally, its acidity dropping low enough to stop bacterial growth. They didn't understand microbiology. They understood consequence. They drank what kept them standing. They abandoned what made men collapse. The result was simple but profound. Systematic avoidance of contaminated freshwater, the single greatest killer aboard later sailing ships. Even the ship itself worked with them. Viking hulls leaked constantly, not by mistake but by acceptance. Seawater flowed in, mixed with debris and waste, and was bailed out within hours. The ship flushed itself, again and again. No stagnant pools, no hidden rot, no invisible incubators breeding sickness below deck. Centuries later, shipbuilders would seal their hulls tight. They trapped moisture. They trapped decay. And without knowing it, they trapped death inside their ships. Vikings didn't eliminate disease. They never claimed to. Parasites remained part of daily life. Teeth rotted. Injuries became infected. Men still died from things no blade could touch. But something crucial never happened. Disease did not spread unchecked. It did not cascade through crews. It did not collapse expeditions. And that was the only metric that mattered. Their success came from a system built on limits, not cures. Control, not conquest. They didn't try to perfect sanitation. They made accumulation impossible. Waste was removed before it could linger. Water was avoided before it could turn lethal. Bodies were reset before parasites could multiply. They didn't place faith in technology. They placed it in discipline, geography, and biology forces that never broke, never malfunctioned, never required permission. Movement replaced infrastructure. Shore replaced storage. Shame replaced enforcement. 5 centuries before Columbus, Norse sailors stood on the shores of North America. Alive, functional, and ready to explore. Not because they were stronger. Not because they were cleaner. But because they understood an ancient truth modern systems often forget. You don't defeat decay. You deny it the chance to grow. The most dangerous problems aren't the ones you fail to fix. They're the ones you allow to quietly build. If this story changed how you see the past or the present, you're already thinking the way we do. This is Dark Origins, where survival is never accidental, and history is shaped by the systems people live inside. Not every civilization falls because it was weak. Some fall because they built too much.